The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere like a dying star, its hull glowing white-hot as it carved a burning path across the dawn sky of Kepler 442b. Inside, Zephyron pressed his massive clawed hands against the cracked viewport, watching the human settlement grow larger through the smoke and flame. His yellow eyes, normally fierce and predatory, now held only resignation. He was going to die on human world. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Kithra warrior's gray fur was matted with purple blood from the plasma burns across his chest and shoulder. His left arm hung useless, the bone shattered when a human destroyer had rammed his cruiser in what could only be described as the most insane tactical maneuver he'd witnessed in 3 decades of warfare. Humans didn't ram ships. They were supposed to be cowards, technology-dependent weaklings who fled at the first sign of real combat. But the destroyer captain had looked him in the eye through the comm screen and smiled before engaging the ramming thrusters. Smiled, as if dying to take down a Kithra warship was somehow amusing. The pod's emergency systems bleated warnings in the guttural Kithra language as the primitive parachute deployed. Not that it would matter. Even if he survived the landing, he was deep in human territory with no way to call for extraction. His pack would assume him dead within the day cycle, and, rightfully so, no Kithra had ever survived capture by humans. It was better to die fighting than face whatever experiments and tortures they had planned. The impact drove his consciousness into darkness. Marcus Chun had been checking the moisture levels in his grain crops when the sky caught fire. He'd lived on the frontier colony of Haven's Rest for 15 years, long enough to know the difference between a meteorite and something manufactured. This was definitely something manufactured, and it was coming down hard in the pine forest about 3 kilometers from his farmstead. He stood in his wheat field, one hand shading his eyes against the morning sun, watching the distant explosion light up the tree line. His wife Sarah would tell him to mind his own business. The colonial authority would tell him to report it and wait for the security team. His common sense told him it was probably dangerous, but Marcus had never been particularly good at listening to any of those voices. He climbed into his old transport hover truck, the kind of reliable but unglamorous vehicle that kept frontier farmers mobile across rough terrain. The engine hummed to life with the quiet efficiency of well-maintained machinery, and he guided it across the access roads that connected the scattered farms and homesteads of the valley. The forest road was rough, built more for emergency access than regular traffic. Marcus had to slow down repeatedly to navigate around fallen trees and washouts from the recent storms. It took him almost an hour to reach the crash site, following the trail of broken trees and scorched earth that marked the pod's violent descent. What he found there made him question his sanity. The escape pod was unlike anything in the Colonial Authority's database of known ship designs. It was organic-looking, with flowing curves and what appeared to be actual bone-like protrusions along its sides. Steam rose from its surface where the superheated metal met the cool forest air, and there was a smell like burning copper and something else he couldn't identify. Marcus parked the truck a safe distance away and approached on foot, his emergency toolkit bouncing against his hip. He'd done rescue work before. Frontier life meant everyone pitched in during emergencies, but this was clearly beyond anything he'd trained for. The pod's hatch had been blown open from the inside, hanging twisted on its hinges. Through the opening, he could see movement. "Hello," he called out, staying back but raising his voice. "Are you injured? I'm here to help." A sound emerged from the pod that made every instinct in his body scream danger. It was a growl, deep and threatening, with an undertone that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Whatever was in that pod, it wasn't human. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. First contact protocols existed, but they assumed controlled conditions and teams of specialists, not a farmer stumbling across a crash in the woods. He took a step back, then forced himself to stop. If this was first contact, if there was a real alien being in that pod, then what he did in the next few minutes might determine the future relationship between species. "I'm not armed," he called out, holding his hands visible and empty. "I saw your ship crash. Are you hurt?" Another growl, weaker this time, followed by what sounded like words in a language that hurt his ears. The sounds were too deep, too guttural for human vocal cords to produce. Marcus made a decision that would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his life. He approached the pod. The being inside was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, even slumped against the pod's interior wall, with a wolf-like head covered in gray fur and eyes like molten gold. Its body was humanoid, but powerfully built, with visible muscle definition beneath the fur and clothing that looked more like armor than fabric. One arm hung at an unnatural angle, and purple blood stained its chest where burns had penetrated the armor. Those golden eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like prey. The creature's lips pulled back to reveal teeth designed for killing, and it said something in that alien language that was clearly a threat. Marcus had no idea what the words meant, but the tone was universal. Stay back or die. Instead, he held up his medical kit and pantomimed treating wounds. I'm a medic, he lied, hoping his intent was clear even if his words weren't understood. I want to help. The alien, and Marcus was certain now that's what he was looking at, seemed to consider this. Its head tilted slightly, and those predator eyes studied him with obvious confusion. It said something else, quieter this time, and Marcus caught what might have been a question in the tone. That's right, Marcus said, keeping his voice calm and steady the way he would with a wounded animal. Help. Medical assistance. I'm not going to hurt you. He took a careful step forward, watching for any sign of aggression. The alien tracked his movement, but didn't growl again. Another step, and he was close enough to see the extent of the injuries. The burns looked bad, possibly life-threatening if left untreated. The broken arm was obviously painful, and there were other wounds he couldn't assess from this angle. This is going to hurt, Marcus warned, knowing the words wouldn't be understood, but hoping the tone would convey his intent. He opened a medical kit and pulled out a dermal regenerator, the most advanced piece of medical equipment a frontier farmer could legally own. The alien's eyes widened when it saw the device. It said something that sounded almost like a question, then extended its uninjured arm toward Marcus in what was unmistakably a gesture of permission. Marcus's hands shook as he activated the regenerator and began treating the worst of the burns. The alien flinched, but didn't pull away, watching the human work with an expression that gradually shifted from suspicion to amazement. There, Marcus said when he'd done what he could with the field equipment. That should help with the pain and prevent infection. But you need real medical attention, more than I can provide out here. He sat back on his heels, studying his patient. The alien was obviously intelligent, clearly from a species with advanced technology based on the design of the escape pod, and most importantly, capable of recognizing and accepting help from a stranger. The question is, Marcus continued, talking as much to calm his own nerves as to communicate. What do I do with you now? If I call this into the Colonial Authority, you'll end up in a laboratory. If I don't, you might die from those injuries. The alien seemed to understand that a decision was being made. It looked at Marcus for a long moment, then spoke in careful, deliberate tones. The words were still incomprehensible, but Marcus got the distinct impression he was being told something important. I wish I could understand you, Marcus admitted, but I think we're going to have to figure this out as we go. He made another decision that would change everything. Can you walk? I've got a truck, and my farm isn't far. I can't treat those injuries properly out here, but I've got a workshop with better equipment and supplies. The alien considered this, then slowly pushed itself upright. It was even more imposing standing up, towering over Marcus by more than a foot. But when it took a step forward, it stumbled, and Marcus instinctively reached out to steady it. The moment his hand touched the alien's uninjured arm, they both froze. The alien stared down at him with those golden eyes, and Marcus realized he was probably the first human to make peaceful, physical contact with this species. Easy, Marcus said softly. I've got you. The walk to the truck was slow and careful, with Marcus supporting much of the alien's weight. Up close, he could see details that made him revise his assumptions about this species. The armor was incredibly sophisticated, with what looked like integrated technology woven into the material. The alien's physical build suggested a species evolved for combat, but the hands that gripped his shoulder had dexterous fingers capable of delicate manipulation. Getting the alien into the passenger seat of the truck required some creative maneuvering, but they managed it. Marcus secured the medical kit and took one last look at the crash site. Whatever happened next, The colonial authority would find the pod eventually. He had maybe a few days before questions started being asked. The ride back to the farm was surreal. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his passenger, still hardly believing what he was doing. The alien sat quietly, watching the landscape pass through the window with obvious interest. When they passed Marcus's grain fields, the alien said something that sounded almost appreciative. "You like the farming?" Marcus asked, following the alien's gaze to his crops. "It's honest work, if not particularly exciting." The alien looked at him and attempted something that might have been a smile. The expression didn't translate well to wolf-like features, but the intent seemed friendly enough. Marcus's farmhouse came into view, a simple but well-maintained structure surrounded by the various outbuildings needed for agricultural work. Sarah's medical clinic was attached to the main house, equipped to handle the emergency needs of a farming community hundreds of kilometers from the nearest hospital. "Oh," Marcus said, pointing at the building. "Safe place." The alien nodded, a gesture that was apparently universal, and Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Whatever this being's species might be like in general, this individual seemed willing to trust him. It was a responsibility that felt enormous. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Marcus saw Sarah emerge from the clinic. Her expression went from curiosity to shock to something approaching panic as she saw his passenger. "Marcus Chun," she called out, her voice carrying the tone that meant he was in serious trouble. "What in the name of sanity have you done?" Marcus climbed out of the truck and walked around to help the alien down. "I found him at a crash site," he explained, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "He's injured, and he's intelligent. We couldn't just leave him there." Sarah approached carefully, her medical training warring with her survival instincts. "He's not human, Marcus. This isn't some lost hiker with a broken leg. This is first contact with an alien species, and you brought him home like a stray dog. Would you rather I left him to die?" Marcus asked, supporting the alien's weight as they made their way toward the clinic entrance. Sarah looked at the alien's injuries, then at his face. Those golden eyes met hers, and Marcus saw her expression shift as she recognized the intelligence behind them. "Damn it, Marcus," she muttered, but she was already opening the clinic door. "Get him inside. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." The alien said something in his language, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the grateful tone was unmistakable. "You're welcome," she replied automatically, then looked embarrassed at having responded to words she couldn't comprehend. As they settled the alien onto an examination table, Marcus reflected on the series of choices that had brought them to this moment. Every rational voice in his head told him he should have called the authorities, followed proper procedures, let the experts handle first contact. But looking at this wounded being who had trusted them enough to come to their home, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring the rules and following your heart instead. He just hoped the consequences wouldn't get them all killed. The medical scanner hummed quietly as Sarah ran it over the alien's injuries, her professional curiosity overriding her fear. The device wasn't designed for non-human physiology, but the basic principles of trauma medicine appeared universal. Burns were burns, fractures were fractures, and blood loss was blood loss, regardless of species. "His cardiovascular system is remarkably similar to ours," she murmured, studying the readings. "Two hearts, though, which explains why he's still conscious despite the blood loss. His bone density is incredible. Whatever broke his arm hit hard enough to shatter reinforced steel." The alien, Marcus had started thinking of him as Zeph after hearing him repeat what sounded like a name several times, watched the scanner with obvious fascination. When Sarah showed him the display, pointing to the images of his internal injuries, he nodded and began speaking in his deep, guttural language. "I think he's trying to tell us about his injuries," Marcus observed. "Look how he gestures when he talks. It's like he's describing what happened." Zeph seemed to understand they couldn't comprehend his words. He pointed to himself, then mimicked an explosion with his good hand, followed by what was clearly meant to represent crashing. Then he pointed at them and made a gesture that could only mean thank you. "Well, at least we know he appreciates the help," Sarah said dryly as she prepared a nerve block injection. "Hold his arm steady, Marcus. I need to set that fracture before the bone starts healing wrong." The next hour was a careful dance of medical intervention and cross-species communication. Zeph proved to be a remarkably cooperative patient, seemingly understanding that they were trying to help despite the language barrier. When Sarah needed him to move a certain way or hold still, he followed her gestured instructions with intelligent compliance. The most challenging moment came when she needed to administer pain medication. Human drugs might be toxic to his physiology, but the alternative was setting a complex fracture without adequate pain relief. Zeph seemed to recognize her dilemma. He held up his good hand, said something that sounded reassuring, and nodded toward the injection. "I think he's telling us to go ahead," Marcus interpreted. "Like he trusts our judgment." "That's a hell of a lot of trust to place in people he just met," Sarah replied, but she prepared a minimal dose of the safest analgesic in her kit. "If this kills him, Marcus, I'm making you explain it to the colonial authority." The injection had the desired effect without obvious adverse reactions. Zeph's tense posture relaxed slightly, and he even attempted that strange not-quite smile again when Sarah successfully set and splinted his broken arm. While Sarah worked, Marcus found himself studying their patient with growing fascination. Everything about Zeph suggested a species evolved for warfare. The powerful musculature, the predatory features, the reflexive way he scanned for threats even while injured. But there was something else there too, an intelligence and dignity that spoke to a complex civilization. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "look at his equipment." She glanced at the armor and clothing they'd carefully removed to treat his injuries. Now that she had time to examine them properly, the sophistication was obvious. The armor incorporated technology they couldn't even identify, with power sources and computational elements woven into the very fabric. His boots alone probably cost more than their entire medical facility. "Whoever his people are, they're technologically advanced," Sarah agreed. "Probably more advanced than us," which raises some uncomfortable questions about why he crashed here in an escape pod. Zeph had been following their conversation despite not understanding the words. When he realized they were examining his belongings, he gestured toward a small device that had been attached to his belt. Sarah handed it to him carefully, and he began manipulating controls with his good hand. The device projected a hologram that made both humans take an involuntary step back. It showed a massive space battle, with ships of impossible size exchanging fire across the void. Marcus could see vessels that looked like flying cities, trading devastating volleys with sleeker, more familiar designs that he gradually recognized as human spacecraft. "Dear God," Sarah whispered, "we're at war with them." Zeph noticed their reaction and quickly changed the display. Now it showed what was clearly his own ship, a beautiful but alien design that looked more grown than built. Then came images of the battle from his perspective, the moment when a human destroyer had rammed his vessel, the explosion that had torn his ship apart, the desperate escape to the pods. But then the hologram showed something unexpected. Zeph manipulated the controls, and the image zoomed in on the human destroyer just before impact. Through the bridge windows, they could see the human crew, men and women not much different from Marcus and Sarah themselves. The display captured the final moments, showing the human captain's face as he initiated the ramming maneuver. What struck Marcus wasn't the determination or hatred he expected to see. Instead, the human captain looked profoundly sad, as if the necessity of the action grieved him. It was the face of someone doing what he believed he had to do, not someone motivated by bloodlust or xenophobic hatred. Zeph noticed Marcus's expression and said something in a tone that conveyed complex emotions. He gestured between the hologram and himself, then at Marcus and Sarah, making a comparison that seemed to surprise him. "I think he's saying we're the same," Marcus said slowly. "The humans in the battle and us. He's realizing we're the same species." Zeph nodded emphatically, then spoke at length while gesturing at the hologram, at his injuries, and at the medical equipment Sarah had used to treat him. The meaning was becoming clearer. He had expected humans to be something other than what he was encountering here. "The question is," Sarah said, "what was he expecting? And why is he surprised that we helped him?" Over the following hours, a rudimentary form of communication began to emerge. Zeph was clearly intelligent and quick to recognize patterns. When Marcus drew simple pictures to represent concepts, Zeph began doing the same. When Sarah demonstrated medical procedures on herself to explain what she was doing, Zeph nodded and even began contributing his own gestures to expand their shared vocabulary. By evening, they had established basic communication. Zeph's people were called the Kithra. They were warriors from a star system Marcus didn't recognize, and they had indeed been fighting humanity across multiple sectors of space. But, as the conversation continued, troubling inconsistencies emerged in their mutual understanding of the conflict. "Show me," Marcus said, gesturing to the holographic display. "Show me how this war started." Zeph manipulated the controls, bringing up what appeared to be historical records. The images showed first contact between humans and Kithra, but the story they told didn't match anything in Marcus's knowledge of recent history. According to Zeph's records, humans had attacked Kithra colonies without provocation, destroying civilian settlements and killing non-combatants. Marcus shook his head and gestured for Sarah to bring their own computer tablet. He pulled up the colonial authorities' official records of first contact with the Kithra, which told a completely different story. In a human version, the Kithra had emerged from unexplored space like a conquering horde, destroying human outposts and enslaving populations before any communication could be established. The two accounts were incompatible. Someone was lying, or both sides had been deliberately misinformed. Zeph studied the human records with growing agitation. He pointed at specific details, shaking his head emphatically and speaking rapidly in his own language. Then, he pulled up more of his own historical files, comparing them directly to the human accounts. "Look at the dates," Sarah said suddenly. "The attacks he's showing happened months before first contact, according to our records. And the attacks in our files predate his records by almost a year." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What if neither side started this war? What if someone else orchestrated the whole thing? Zeph had apparently reached a similar conclusion. He was manipulating his device frantically now, pulling up communications logs and tactical data. When he found what he was looking for, he showed them shipping manifests and supply records that included a third party, neither human nor Kithra. The species identifier was unfamiliar, but the implication was clear. Someone else had been selling weapons and information to both sides, prolonging a conflict that should never have started. "We've been played," Sarah said quietly. "Both our species have been manipulated into destroying each other, while someone else profits from the chaos." Zeph looked at them both with an expression that conveyed profound betrayal and growing anger. But the anger wasn't directed at them. It was focused on whoever had orchestrated this deception. He spoke at length, and while they couldn't understand his words, his tone made his feelings clear. Marcus found himself looking at this alien warrior, this enemy combatant who should have been his mortal foe, and seeing instead a victim of the same manipulation that had cost human lives across a dozen star systems. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked. "Even if we're right about this, who's going to believe us? And more importantly, what do we prove it?" Zeph seemed to understand the question despite the language barrier. He gestured to his communication device, then to himself, then to the humans. The meaning was clear. Together, they might be able to gather the evidence needed to expose the truth. But first, he needed to heal. And that meant trusting these humans completely, just as they had chosen to trust him. As night fell over the farm, Marcus prepared a sleeping area in the barn's equipment storage room. It was private, secure, and large enough for Zeph's considerable frame. Sarah provided additional medical supplies and monitoring equipment, wanting to keep track of his recovery through the night. Before they left him to rest, Zeph did something unexpected. He removed a small pendant from around his neck, something that had survived the crash intact, and held it out to Marcus. The gesture was clearly significant, though its exact meaning was unclear. "I think it's a token of trust," Sarah suggested. "Maybe something important to his people." Marcus accepted the pendant carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own faint light. When his fingers closed around it, Zeph nodded solemnly and spoke what could only be a formal declaration of some kind. "Thank you," Marcus replied, knowing the inadequacy of words, but hoping his tone would convey his acceptance of whatever responsibility the gift represented. As they walked back to the house, Sarah voiced the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "What happens tomorrow, Marcus? We can't keep this secret indefinitely. The Colonial Authority will come looking for that crash site, and when they do, they'll want answers." Marcus looked back at the barn where their unlikely guest was settling in for the night. In less than 24 hours, his understanding of the galaxy had been completely overturned. Humanity wasn't fighting a war against aggressive alien invaders. They were pawns in someone else's game, manipulated into mutual destruction while the real enemy remained hidden. Tomorrow, he said firmly, we start figuring out how to stop a war. In the barn, Zeph lay awake despite his exhaustion, staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had happened. He had been prepared to die as a warrior. Instead, he had discovered that everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong, and everything he had been taught about this war was a lie. His pack would never believe him if he returned with stories of human kindness and medical treatment. The Kithra military would dismiss such claims as impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. He was alive because two humans had risked their safety to help a complete stranger, even knowing that stranger belonged to an enemy species. More disturbing was the growing certainty that his own people had been deceived just as thoroughly as the humans. The implications of that deception were staggering. How many Kithra warriors had died fighting an enemy that should have been an ally? How many human civilians had been killed in retaliatory strikes against an aggression that had never actually occurred? Zeph touched the bandages covering his burns, feeling the strange human medicine working to heal tissue that should have taken weeks to regenerate naturally. These creatures possessed a medical knowledge and compassion that contradicted everything he had been taught about their savage, primitive nature. Tomorrow would bring difficult choices. His duty as a Kithra warrior demanded that he find a way to return to his people and resume his role in the war effort. But his growing understanding of the truth behind that war made such a return seem like a betrayal of everything he had learned here. Perhaps there was a third option. Perhaps the human Marcus and his mate Sarah were correct that working together, they could expose the deception that had cost so many lives on both sides. It would mean abandoning everything he had been trained to believe, but it might also mean preventing countless future deaths. For the first time since a ship had been destroyed, Zeph allowed himself to hope. Not for rescue or escape, but for something far more valuable, the possibility of peace between species that had never needed to be enemies. The pendant he had given Marcus contained more than just symbolic value. It was a communication device, capable of reaching Kithra networks across vast distances. If they could find a way to use it safely, it might provide the evidence needed to convince both sides that they were fighting the wrong war. But first he needed to heal. And, more importantly, he needed to learn everything these humans could teach him about trust, cooperation, and the strange concept they called hope. 3 days passed before the Colonial Authority found the crash site. Marcus watched from his grain fields as the security vehicles descended from orbit, their distinctive blue and white markings visible even from several kilometers away. He'd been expecting this moment, but it still sent a chill through him as he realized how quickly their peaceful sanctuary was about to be disrupted. "Zeph," he called, jogging toward the barn. "The authorities are here. We need to make a decision." Inside the converted storage room, the Kithra warrior was practicing basic English phrases with Sarah, his deep voice struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. His recovery had been remarkable. Whatever his people's physiology was like, they healed far more quickly than humans. The burns were already showing healthy tissue growth, and he could move his previously broken arm with only minor discomfort. "Decision," Zeph asked, the word still awkward in his mouth, but clearly understood. "Hide or reveal," Marcus explained, gesturing toward the window where the security vehicles were now visible as dark specks against the sky. "If they find you, you become a prisoner of war. If you stay hidden, you remain free but trapped here." Zeph considered this carefully. Over the past few days, his understanding of human language had improved dramatically, though complex concepts still required gestures and visual aids. More importantly, his understanding of human nature had been completely revolutionized. These weren't the savage, treacherous creatures described in Kithra military briefings. Marcus worked his land with a dedication that reminded Zeph of his own people's commitment to their duties. Sarah healed without regard for species or allegiance, driven by an ethical code that transcended politics. They had accepted him into their home despite every rational reason to fear him, and they had asked for nothing in return except his trust. "I choose third option," Zeph said slowly, the grammatical construction still unfamiliar but his meaning clear. What third option? Sarah asked, though Marcus thought he understood what their guest was thinking. We tell truth, Zeph explained, his golden eyes serious. Show evidence. Stop war. It was exactly what Marcus had been hoping he would say, though the practical implications were terrifying. Revealing Zeph to the colonial authority would certainly lead to his detention, probably his imprisonment, and possibly his death if the military decided he was too dangerous to keep alive. But it might also provide their only chance to expose the deception that had started this war. That's incredibly dangerous, Sarah warned. For all of us. Once the authorities know we've been harboring you, we become accessories to treason at best. Then, we make sure we have enough evidence to prove we're right, Marcus replied. Zeph, can that pennant you gave me really access your people's military networks? Zeph nodded, then retrieved the device from where Marcus had kept it safely stored. Not only access, can transmit, but dangerous. My people track all communications. If we use wrong, they send warriors here. And if we use it right, Marcus asked. If we use it right, Zeph said carefully, we maybe save both peoples from war that should not exist. The sound of approaching aircraft made the decision for them. Marcus could see the distinctive signatures of colonial authority interceptors sweeping the area in a search pattern. They would find the farm within hours, and when they did, they would want to interview everyone who might have witnessed the crash. Sarah, get your medical records, Marcus decided. Everything documenting Zeph's treatment. If we're going to do this, we need to prove he was a patient, not a prisoner. Marcus, are you sure about this? Sarah asked, but she was already moving toward her files. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment I decided to help him instead of calling it in, Marcus replied. At least this way, we might accomplish something worthwhile. Zeph watched their preparations with growing respect for these humans' courage. They were risking everything, their freedom, their lives, their entire future, to do what they believed was right. It was a level of honor that would have impressed even the most decorated Kithara warriors. I help, he declared, struggling with the pronoun, but making his commitment clear. My people respect strength and honor. You show both. The first security vehicle landed in Marcus's yard 20 minutes later, kicking up clouds of dust from the dirt road. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez emerged from the lead aircraft, flanked by a team of combat engineers and intelligence specialists. Marcus recognized her from previous interactions with the colonial authority. She was competent, fair-minded, and, unfortunately, not someone who could be easily deceived. Marcus walked out to meet them, his hands visible and his posture deliberately non-threatening. Behind him, Sarah emerged from the house, carrying her medical bag, while Zeph waited in the barn according to their hastily conceived plan. Mr. Chun, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez greeted him with professional courtesy. I assume you're aware of why we're here. The crash 3 days ago, Marcus confirmed. We saw the explosion in the forest. Did you investigate the crash site? She asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. I did, Marcus admitted. I found a wreckage of what appeared to be an alien escape pod, and I found a survivor. Martinez's expression shifted to sharp attention. A survivor? Where is this individual now? Receiving medical treatment, Sarah interjected, joining the conversation. He was badly injured in the crash. Burns, fractures, blood loss. He would have died without immediate intervention. You're harboring an alien combatant? Martinez asked, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. We're providing medical aid to an injured sentient being, Marcus corrected firmly. The same as we would for any human in similar circumstances. Martinez studied them both carefully. Mr. Chun, Dr. Chun, you understand the implications of what you're telling me? We're at war with these creatures. This individual is an enemy of humanity. Is he? Sarah challenged. Based on what evidence? Have you spoken with him? Have you attempted to establish communication? That's not how this works, Martinez replied, but Marcus detected a note of uncertainty in her voice. Protocol requires the immediate detention of any hostile alien contact. Then, let's establish whether he's actually hostile, Marcus suggested, before we make assumptions that might cost us the opportunity to understand what's really happening here. Zeph chose that moment to emerge from the barn, his massive frame backlit by the afternoon sun. The security team's weapons were trained on him instantly, but he made no aggressive moves. Instead, he walked slowly toward the group with his hands clearly visible, stopping several meters away in a gesture of non-threatening approach. "Lieutenant Colonel Martinez," he said in carefully pronounced English, "I request formal parley under civilian protection." The shocked silence that followed was broken only by the whisper of wind through the grain fields. Martinez stared at the alien warrior, clearly struggling to reconcile his articulate request with her preconceptions about hostile alien invaders. "You speak our language," she said finally. "I learn quickly," Zeph replied. "These humans teach me much. About language, about healing, about honor." "Sir," one of Martinez's subordinates whispered urgently, "we should secure the prisoner immediately. This could be some kind of trick." "No trick," Zeph said, apparently having overheard. "I have evidence. Evidence of deception. Evidence that war between our peoples, not what it seems." Martinez looked at Marcus and Sarah, then back at Zeph. "What kind of evidence?" Zeph gestured toward the pendant Marcus still carried. "Communication device. Contains records from my ship, from Kithra military networks. Shows truth about how conflict began." "And what truth is that?" Martinez asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to take this seriously. "Both our peoples deceived," Zeph explained, his English improving as he spoke. "Third-party manipulated first contact, created false attacks, made us enemies when we should be allies." Marcus saw Martinez's expression change as the implication sank in. If Zeph was correct, then every tactical decision, every strategic plan, every casualty report from the war had been based on false premises. "That's a serious accusation," Martinez said carefully. "You claim to have proof of this." "Show you," Zeph offered, retrieving his holographic device. "But must be careful. If Kithra military detects transmission, they send war fleet here. If human military believes I am spy, you execute me. Either way, truth dies with me." The next hour was unlike anything in Martinez's experience as a colonial authority officer. Zeph's holographic records painted a picture of systematic manipulation that made her question every briefing she'd ever received about the alien threat. The evidence was sophisticated, detailed, and disturbingly convincing. "These shipping manifests," she said, studying the displayed data, "they show weapon sales to both sides from the same source." "Yes," Zeph confirmed. "Species call themselves difficult to translate, maybe traders of chaos. They profit from conflict, selling arms and information to maintain warfare." "But why?" Sarah asked. "What do they gain from keeping our species at war?" "Simple," Zeph explained with bitter understanding. "While we fight each other, we not expand into their territory. While we kill each other, we not threaten their trade routes. They keep us weak by keeping us enemies." Martinez studied the alien warrior who was revealing state secrets to help humans understand their mutual enemy. Every regulation demanded that she arrest him immediately, but every instinct told her this was their best chance to understand the true nature of the conflict. "Mr. Chun," she said finally, "Dr. Chun, you understand that by harboring this individual and failing to report alien contact, you violated several federal statutes." "Yes," Marcus replied simply. "And you, Zeph Hyron of the Kithra, that is your correct name and title?" "Correct," Zeph confirmed. "You understand that by providing intelligence about your military's operations, you're committing treason against your own people." "Yes," Zeph said without hesitation. "But greater treason would be allowing deception to continue when I know truth." Martinez looked around the group, at the human couple who had risked everything to help an enemy, at the alien warrior who was betraying his own people to prevent further bloodshed, at the evidence that suggested everything she'd been taught about this war was a lie. "I'm going to make a decision that will either save both our species or get us all executed," she announced. "I'm going to recommend that my superiors authorize a joint intelligence operation to verify this evidence and identify these traitors of chaos who have been manipulating us." "And if your superiors refuse?" Sarah asked. "Then we'll have to find another way," Martinez replied grimly. "Because if this information is accurate, continuing this war serves no one's interests except our mutual enemies." Zeph stepped forward, his massive frame imposing, but his manner respectful. "Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, I make formal request. Allow me to contact my people, to share evidence with Kithra Military Command. Risk is great, They may not believe, may think I am corrupted by human contact. But if even few warriors understand truth, it might create enough doubt to start asking the right questions. Martinez finished. It's dangerous. For all of us. All war is dangerous, Zeph replied with simple wisdom. But fighting wrong war for wrong reasons, that is true tragedy. As evening approached, an unlikely alliance began to form in Marcus's farmhouse kitchen. A human military officer, 2 frontier farmers, and an alien warrior sat around the same table where Marcus and Sarah had shared countless quiet meals, planning an operation that could expose a conspiracy spanning multiple star systems. The communication risks are enormous, Martinez explained, reviewing the technical challenges. If the Kithra military detects unauthorized transmissions, they'll assume you've been compromised and possibly tortured for information. Then, we make transmission look authorized, Zeph suggested. I am ship commander, have authority to request intelligence clarification from Fleet Command. Frame evidence as questions about mission parameters, not accusations of deception. And if they don't believe you? Marcus asked. Zeph's expression grew grim. Then, they send recovery force to retrieve me and eliminate human witnesses. But if they do believe, if they see what I've seen here, then maybe we stop war before more die on both sides. Sarah looked around the table at these 3 individuals who had somehow become responsible for potentially ending an interstellar conflict. When did we become diplomats? When we chose to do what was right instead of what was easy, Marcus replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Martinez checked her tactical display, noting the positions of her security teams around the farm. We have maybe 12 hours before I have to file my official report. If we're going to attempt this communication, it has to be tonight. Then, tonight, we change galaxy, Zeph declared with the confidence of a warrior who had found a cause worth fighting for. Tonight, we choose peace over profit, truth over deception. As the sun set over Haven's Rest, casting long shadows across the grain fields, for unlikely allies prepared to risk everything on the hope that truth could triumph over manipulation, and that former enemies could become the strongest of allies. The pendant in Marcus's hand pulsed with alien energy, ready to carry their message across the void to a species that had every reason to see them as enemies. Whether that message would bring peace or precipitate a final, devastating battle remained to be seen. But, for the first time since the war began, there was reason to hope for something better than mutual destruction. The communication attempt began at 2,300 hours, when both Kithra and human fleets would be observing their respective night cycles. Zeph sat before the modified pendant device, its alien circuitry now interfaced with human encryption equipment that Martinez's team had hastily assembled. The combination of technologies created something neither species had developed alone, a quantum encrypted communication system that could potentially reach across galactic distances without detection by the mysterious third party. Remember, Martinez coached him, you're requesting clarification on mission parameters. You encountered unexpected human behavior that doesn't match intelligence briefings, and you need guidance on how to proceed. Zeph nodded, his clawed fingers dancing over the device's holographic controls with practiced precision. I frame as confusion, not accusation. Make them think through inconsistencies themselves. Sarah monitored his vital signs through portable medical scanners, noting the elevated stress indicators. His heart rate is through the roof, she whispered to Marcus. Whatever happens, this is incredibly dangerous for him. For all of us, Marcus replied, watching the quantum encryption displays that Martinez's technicians had set up around the kitchen table. If this transmission is detected by the wrong parties, the pendant suddenly blazed with ethereal light, and a holographic display materialized above the table, showing the Kithra fleet disposition in nearby star systems. The detail was staggering. Marcus could see individual ships, their tactical positions, even crew complement data scrolling past in alien characters. Connection established, Zeph announced, his voice taking on formal military cadence. Fleet Command, this is War Leader Zeph Iron of the 7th Pack, requesting guidance on tactical situation. The response came within seconds, a deep voice speaking in the growling Kithra language. Zeph replied formally, and what followed was clearly an official military exchange. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but The tone suggested routine communication between a field commander and his superiors. Then, Zeph's demeanor changed. He began speaking more rapidly, with underlying tension that needed no translation. The holographic display shifted to show the evidence they had compiled, the shipping manifests, the timeline inconsistencies, the weapon sales records that proved third-party manipulation. The response from Fleet Command was immediate and explosive. Multiple voices began speaking over each other in increasingly agitated tones. The holographic display showed ships changing positions, weapons systems coming online, communication arrays swiveling toward unknown targets. "They're taking it seriously," Martinez observed grimly. "Those are combat formation changes." "Yes," Zeph confirmed without breaking his concentration on the communication. Fleet Commander Gaskar is, how you say, extremely disturbed by evidence. He demands verification, orders immediate investigation of supply chain records. But then something went wrong. Warning indicators began flashing on both the human and Kithara systems simultaneously. Zeph's expression shifted to alarm as he recognized the signs. "Detection," he announced tersely. "Third-party monitoring networks. They know we communicate." On the holographic display, new contacts appeared, ships of unfamiliar design dropping out of faster-than-light travel in multiple locations. The vessels were sleek, predatory-looking things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most disturbing of all, they were positioning themselves between the human and Kithara fleets. "Traders of chaos," Zeph identified grimly. "They moved to prevent our peoples from meeting, from sharing information." Fleet Commander Gaskar's voice cut through the communication chaos, speaking in accented but clear English that surprised everyone except Zeph. "Human allies of war leader Zephyron, this is Fleet Commander Gaskar of the Kithara 3rd Battle Fleet. We have confirmed your evidence and identified mutual enemy. Request immediate coordination to prevent third-party interference." Martinez leaned forward, her command training taking over. "Fleet Commander, this is Lieutenant Colonel Martinez of the Colonial Authority. What are your tactical recommendations?" "Simple," came a reply. "Our fleets must meet, share intelligence, coordinate response before traders of chaos eliminate witnesses to their deception. They have cloaked vessels moving toward your position now." The pendant's holographic display shifted to show local space around Haven's Rest. 3 dark shapes were approaching the planet, their stealth systems barely detectable even by advanced sensors. Their intent was obvious: eliminate the evidence and everyone who had seen it. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, though she was already gathering critical medical supplies. 12 minutes until orbital bombardment range," Martinez calculated, studying the tactical display. "We need to evacuate immediately." "No," Zeph said firmly. "Evacuation means they succeed, evidence destroyed, truth hidden. We make stand here." "With what?" Marcus asked. "We have one security team against ships that could destroy this entire continent." Zeph smiled, an expression that was still unsettling on his wolf-like features, but somehow reassuring. "We have something they not expect. We have cooperation." He manipulated the pendant's controls again, and the holographic display expanded to show Fleet Commander Gaskar's ships accelerating toward Haven's Rest. At the same time, Martinez's communication equipment detected human Colonial Authority vessels changing course to intercept. "Both our fleets respond to protect this place," Zeph explained. "Traders of chaos expect continued hostility between species. They not prepare for alliance. But will both fleets recognize each other as allies before they start shooting?" Sarah asked the critical question. "That," Fleet Commander Gaskar's voice interjected through the communication link, "depends on human willingness to trust former enemies." Martinez looked around the table at the unlikely alliance that had formed in Marcus's kitchen. A frontier farmer who had risked everything to help a wounded stranger. A frontier doctor who had treated an alien patient without thought for the political consequences. An alien warrior who had betrayed his own people's military secrets to prevent further bloodshed. And now a human military officer who was about to authorize the most unprecedented cooperation in either species' history. "Fleet Commander," she said formally, "the Colonial Authority accepts the Kithara proposal for immediate military alliance against mutual enemies. Transmitting tactical frequencies and identification codes now." The next few minutes were a blur of activity that would have been impossible to imagine just days earlier. Human and Kithara vessels coordinated their approach vectors, sharing sensor data and target acquisition information with the efficiency of long-term allies. The language barrier proved minimal at the tactical level. Military mathematics was apparently universal. On the ground, Martinez's security teams established defensive positions around the farm, while Zeph provided intelligence about Trader of Chaos ground assault capabilities. His knowledge proved invaluable, describing weapons and tactics that human forces had never encountered. Their assault troops use phase shift technology, he explained, manipulating the holographic display to show enemy capabilities. Can become partially incorporeal, pass through solid barriers. But phase shift makes them vulnerable to specific energy frequencies. What frequencies? Martinez asked, already calculating modifications to their defensive systems. Zeph provided the technical specifications, and Martinez's engineers began reconfiguring their weapons to exploit this vulnerability. It was the kind of tactical intelligence that would have been impossible to obtain without Kithara cooperation. The first Trader of Chaos ship reached orbital bombardment position and immediately opened fire. But instead of the devastating energy beams Marcus expected, the attack was precisely targeted, surgical strikes designed to eliminate specific individuals rather than level the entire area. They want to capture evidence intact, Zeph realized. Kill witnesses, but preserve technology for analysis. The orbital bombardment was intercepted by coordinated fire from approaching human and Kithara vessels. Energy shields that neither species could have generated alone deflected the attack, while return fire from both fleets forced the enemy ships to defensive maneuvering. Impossible, came a transmission in heavily accented standard from one of the trader vessels. Human and Kithara cooperation not possible. Our psychological profiles confirm mutual hatred. Your psychological profiles, Fleet Commander Gaskar responded with obvious satisfaction, did not account for individual honor overcoming species prejudice. The ground assault began 20 minutes later, with shimmering forms materializing around the farm's perimeter. But Martinez's modified weapons proved effective against the phase-shifted attackers, while Zeph's tactical knowledge allowed them to anticipate enemy movements. Marcus found himself fighting alongside the alien warrior who had been his enemy just days ago, covering Zeph's movements while the Kithara provided devastating close combat support. Sarah coordinated medical support for both human and Kithara personnel who were injured in the engagement, her clinic becoming a field hospital for an unprecedented alliance. The battle was brief, but intense. Trader of Chaos forces were accustomed to facing enemies who couldn't effectively coordinate their defenses. Against a combined human-Kithara response that shared real-time intelligence and coordinated tactical support, their advantages evaporated quickly. When the last phase shifted infiltrator fell to Martinez's modified energy weapons, an eerie quiet settled over the farm. In orbit, the surviving trader vessels were retreating at maximum acceleration, pursued by the combined human-Kithara fleet. Victory, Zeph announced, though his tone carried no satisfaction. But this is only beginning. Traders of Chaos have manipulated conflicts across galaxy. Many species fight wars they not start, kill enemies who should be allies. Then, we stop them, Martinez declared with military decisiveness. All of them. Everywhere. Fleet Commander Gaskar's holographic image appeared through the communication link, showing a Kithara commander whose features were marked by years of warfare, but whose eyes held new hope. War leader Zeph Iron, you have brought great honor to the Kithara people. Your actions today will be remembered for generations. Honor belongs to humans who showed mercy to wounded enemy, Zeph replied formally. They taught me that true strength comes from protection of weak, not domination of strong. Marcus looked around his devastated farm. Bullet holes in his barn walls, scorch marks across his grain fields, alien technology scattered around his kitchen. But more importantly, he saw Lieutenant Colonel Martinez coordinating with alien fleet commanders as if they had been allies for years. He saw Sarah treating wounded Kithara warriors alongside human security personnel. He saw Zeph standing beside his former enemies, planning joint operations against a mutual threat. What happens now? Sarah asked, expressing what everyone was thinking. Now, Fleet Commander Gaskar announced. We take war to those who profit from deception. Human and Kithra fleets will coordinate to track down traitor of chaos operations throughout galaxy. We share intelligence, technology, tactical knowledge. And on the ground? Marcus asked. On ground. Zeph replied with obvious respect for the humans who had changed his understanding of honor. We learn from each other. Humans teach Kithra about mercy, cooperation, healing. Kithra teach humans about honor, strength, loyalty. Martinez nodded approvingly. I'll need to coordinate with both human and Kithra command structures, establish formal alliance protocols. But first, I need to file a very unusual report with the Colonial Authority. What will you tell them? Sarah asked. The truth, Martinez replied simply. That a farmer's decision to help a wounded enemy has ended a war and started a friendship that might save both our species. As a combined human Kithra fleet departed to begin hunting down traitor of chaos operations, Zeph remained on Haven's Rest as the first official Kithra ambassador to humanity. His credentials have been established not through diplomatic channels, but through the courage to trust former enemies with his life. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Two species that had been manipulated into mutual hatred would need to learn cooperation, trust, and friendship. It would require patience, understanding, and the kind of wisdom that comes from recognizing shared values beneath surface differences. But they had something to build on. The memory of a wounded alien warrior who had been ready to die until a human farmer gave him hope, and the proof that compassion could triumph over manipulation when good beings on both sides were willing to choose trust over fear. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in years, that was a cause for celebration rather than despair. 6 months after first contact at Haven's Rest, the galaxy was transforming in ways that no political analyst had predicted and no military strategist had planned for. The Human Kithra Alliance had become the dominant peacekeeping force across 4 sectors of space, hunting down traitor of chaos operations with efficiency that surprised even their own commanders. Marcus stood in his rebuilt farmhouse kitchen, now equipped with both human and Kithra communication equipment that allowed him to coordinate with Alliance operations across the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him that his simple farm had become an unofficial diplomatic center, hosting meetings between species that had been trying to exterminate each other just months earlier. The Zeridian system has agreed to join the Alliance, Sarah announced, reading from a data tablet that combined human interface design with Kithra holographic technology. That makes 17 species who've requested protection from traitor manipulation since we exposed the conspiracy. Zeph looked up from the agricultural reports he'd been studying. His latest fascination was learning human farming techniques that might improve Kithra colony food production. 17 species who learned they fight wrong wars for wrong reasons. He corrected gently. Number grows each day. The transformation in Zeph himself was remarkable. 6 months of living among humans had changed him from a traditional Kithra warrior into something entirely new, a bridge between species who understood both cultures intimately. His English was now flawless, his understanding of human psychology sophisticated, and his ability to translate concepts between species had made him invaluable to the Alliance. Any word from the Deep Space Reconnaissance? Marcus asked, referring to the joint human Kithra missions that were tracking down the traitors of chaos to their source. Fleet Commander Gaskar reports significant progress, Zeph replied, activating a holographic display that showed tactical positions across multiple star systems. 3 major traitor installations destroyed, weapons shipments intercepted, manipulation networks disrupted. But most important discovery is this. The hologram shifted to show a massive space station hidden in an uncharted nebula, clearly the center of traitor of chaos operations. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with docking facilities that could accommodate hundreds of vessels. Command Center, Sarah breathed, studying the intelligence data. How many species do you think they've manipulated into warfare? Analysis suggests operations spanning centuries, Zeph explained grimly. Dozens of species, hundreds of conflicts, millions of deaths, all to maintain traitor control over galactic trade routes and prevent any single species from becoming too powerful. Marcus felt a familiar chill at the scope of the deception. The war between humans and Kythera had been just one small piece of a conspiracy that spanned the known galaxy, designed to keep every spacefaring species weak through perpetual conflict. "When do we move against the command center?" Marcus asked, though part of him still found it surreal that a frontier farmer was asking questions about galactic military strategy. "Soon," Zeph replied. "But first we need more allies. Station defenses are formidable, requires coordinated assault from multiple fleets. Human and Kythera forces not sufficient alone." A soft chime from the communication system announced an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display shifted to show Admiral Chun, no relation to Marcus, who commanded the human contingent of the Alliance fleet. Beside her stood War Marshal Theckerun, the highest-ranking Kythera military officer who had embraced the Alliance. Marcus, Sarah, Zeph, Admiral Chun greeted them formally. "We have a development that requires the input of our founding members." The term founding members always amused Marcus. He'd gone from being a simple farmer to being one of the 3 individuals credited with establishing the most significant interspecies alliance in galactic history. The colonial authority had offered him political positions, military ranks, and academic appointments. He'd turned them all down, preferring to remain exactly what he'd always been, a farmer who happened to have alien friends. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, her medical training making her instinctively focus on problems that needed solving. War Marshal Theckerun spoke in the formal tones that Kythera used for serious military matters. "The Vorthan Republic has contacted us through intermediaries. They wish to discuss joining the Alliance, but their situation is complicated." "How complicated?" Zeph inquired, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "The Vorthans have been fighting a 3-way war for 15 years, Admiral Chen explained, against the Selenite Empire and the Crystalline Collective. All 3 species have been receiving weapons and intelligence from sources that match Trader of Chaos patterns." Marcus understood immediately. They're all victims of manipulation, but they don't know it yet. And after 15 years of warfare, the hatred between them is real, even if the original cause was fabricated. "Exactly," War Marshal Thecteron confirmed. Unlike human Kythera conflict, which was still relatively new when truth was revealed, these species have generational hatred. Children who lost parents, worlds that were destroyed, atrocities committed by all sides. "So how do we approach them?" Sarah asked. "We can't just show up and say, 'Surprise, your war is fake,' and expect them to shake hands and make peace." Zeph stood up from his chair, his impressive height making the farmhouse kitchen seem suddenly cramped. "We show them what we learned. That former enemies can become strongest allies. That trust is possible even after betrayal." "You're proposing we go there personally," Marcus realized. "All 3 of us." "Not just us," Zeph clarified. "Full delegation. Admiral Chun, War Marshal Thecteron, fleet representatives from all Alliance species. Show them what cooperation looks like." Admiral Chun nodded approvingly. "The idea has merit, but the risks are enormous. 3 species locked in perpetual warfare, all of them armed with advanced technology, none of them predisposed to trust outsiders. All diplomatic contact requires risk," War Marshal Theckerun pointed out. "Question is whether potential benefits justify danger." Marcus looked around his kitchen at the representatives of species that had been mortal enemies 6 months ago, now planning joint operations as naturally as if they'd been allies for decades. If that transformation was possible, perhaps anything was. "When do we leave?" he asked. The journey to the Vorthan Republic took 3 weeks aboard the Alliance flagship Unity, a vessel that had been jointly designed and built by human and Kythera engineers. The ship was a marvel of cooperative technology, sleek Kythera aesthetics combined with human practicality and reliability. More importantly, it carried the largest diplomatic mission in galactic history, with representatives from 19 different species who had joined the Alliance after learning they'd been manipulated into unnecessary conflicts. Marcus spent the journey learning what he could about Vorthan, Selenite, and crystalline culture from the Alliance's xenobiology experts. Each species was remarkable in its own way. The Vorthans were aquatic mammals with advanced biotechnology. The Selenites were silicon-based beings who thought in geological timescales, and the Crystalline Collective was a hive mind of mineral entities who communicated through harmonic resonance. How do you explain concepts like trust and forgiveness to beings who don't think like us, Marcus asked during one of the briefing sessions. Same way humans explain such concepts to each other. Zeph replied with the wisdom he'd gained from his months among humans. Through actions, not words. Show them cooperation works. Let them see benefits of alliance. And if they refuse to listen? Sarah asked. Then, we try again, Admiral Chen said simply. And again, until either they accept truth or traitors of chaos achieve goal of eternal warfare. The Vorthan system was a testament to the destructive power of perpetual warfare. What had once been a thriving collection of 12 inhabited worlds was now a battlefield spanning 3 star systems. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons, asteroid fields had been hollowed out into military bases, and the space lanes were filled with patrol fleets from all 3 species. 15 years of this, War Marshal Theckerun observed grimly as they studied the tactical situation. Entire generation that knows nothing but war. The first contact was tense. Vorthan patrol vessels surrounded the Unity within minutes of their arrival, their weapons charged, and their communication channels demanding identification and statement of purpose. When Admiral Chun announced that they represented an interspecies alliance seeking to establish diplomatic relations, the response was skeptical at best. Alliance came a translated response from the Vorthan fleet commander. Between which species? The Selenites who poisoned our water worlds? The crystallines who shattered our trade stations? Between species who learned they were manipulated into unnecessary conflict. Zeph responded through the translation matrix. Species who discovered their real enemies were those who profit from warfare. What followed was the most complex diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. Representatives from 19 alliance species presented evidence of traitor of chaos manipulation to leaders from 3 species who had legitimate reasons to hate each other. The sessions were tense, emotional, and frequently interrupted by accusations and counter-accusations based on 15 years of accumulated grievances. But slowly, patterns began to emerge. The Vorthan's initial attack on Selenite colonies had been based on intelligence suggesting imminent Selenite invasion, intelligence that had been provided by mysterious third-party sources. The Selenites' retaliatory strikes had been guided by tactical data that promised minimal civilian casualties, data that had been deliberately falsified. The Crystalline Collective's decision to enter the war had been influenced by evidence of both sides planning to harvest their mineral colonies, evidence that investigation proved to be completely fabricated. Every decision we made, the Vorthan Prime Minister said during one session, her aquatic features expressing the complex emotions that needed no translation. Every strategy, every target, every response, all of it based on information from sources we thought we could trust. The pattern is identical, Admiral Chen agreed. Third-party sources providing intelligence that escalated tensions, weapons dealers offering advanced technology to all sides, diplomatic intermediaries who prevented direct communication between your species. The breakthrough came when Zeph shared his personal story with the assembled delegates. Standing before representatives of species who had been killing each other for 15 years, he described his crash landing on Haven's Rest, his expectation of death or torture, and his discovery that humans were nothing like the savage primitives described in Kithra military briefings. I prepared to die as warrior, he said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. Instead, I learned to live as something better. These humans showed me that true strength comes from choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. Marcus found himself speaking to the assembly, describing his decision to help a wounded enemy despite every rational argument against it. Sarah talked about treating injuries without regard for species or political allegiance. Admiral Chun and War Marshal Theckerun described the transformation of their fleets from mortal enemies to trusted allies. What you're asking, the Selenite representative said, is silicon-based form shifting with what might have been uncertainty, is that we forgive 15 years of losses, 15 years of suffering, 15 years of death. No, Marcus replied. We're asking you to recognize that the suffering was real, but the cause was false. That your true enemies aren't each other, but those who manipulated you into conflict for their own benefit. The decision to authorize a joint investigation of traitor of chaos infiltration took 3 days of debate. The decision to coordinate military action against identified traitor installations took another week. But the decision to trust each other, really trust, the way Marcus had trusted a wounded alien warrior in his barn, that took months of careful cooperation, shared victories, and the gradual recognition that former enemies could become genuine friends. The assault on the Traitor of Chaos Command Center was the largest coordinated military action in galactic history. 22 species contributed vessels, personnel, and resources to an operation that would have been impossible without the trust and cooperation that had grown from a single act of compassion on a frontier world. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Unity, watching the combined fleet approach the massive station that had been the source of so much manipulation and death. Beside him, Zeph monitored tactical communications in a dozen languages, while Sarah coordinated medical support for casualties from species with wildly different physiologies. Final approach, Admiral Chen announced. All fleets report ready for coordinated assault. The battle was fierce but decisive. The Traitors of Chaos had been prepared for attacks by individual species, even small alliances of 2 or 3 powers. They were not prepared for a coordinated assault by 22 species sharing real-time intelligence, complementary tactics, and absolute trust in each other's commitment to the mission. When a massive station finally fell, its destruction marked more than a military victory. It represented the end of centuries of manufactured conflict and the beginning of a new era of galactic cooperation. Status report. War Marshal Thekaran requested as the last Traitor vessels fled into deep space. Command Center destroyed, came the responses from fleet commanders across the Allied force. Weapons stockpiles eliminated. Communication networks disabled. Financial records captured for analysis. Marcus looked out at the fleet that had achieved this victory. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all working together with an efficiency that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. What happens now? Sarah asked, voicing the question that everyone was thinking. Now, Zeph replied with satisfaction, we go home. All of us, to all our worlds. And we build something better than what came before. The Alliance will need formal structure, Admiral Chen noted. Treaties, protocols, governing bodies. Yes, Marcus agreed. But not on some distant capital world or space station. Here, in places where people actually live and work. Where a farmer can sit down with a warrior and figure out how to solve problems. 6 months later, Marcus was back in his fields, checking the moisture levels in crops that now fed not just the local human community, but also the Kithra Agricultural Research Station that had been built adjacent to his farm. The station was part of a network of cooperative facilities that stretched across Alliance space, each one a symbol of species working together for mutual benefit. Zeph emerged from the research station, carrying a data tablet filled with growing season projections that combined human agricultural wisdom with Kithra biotechnology. Harvest projections exceed all previous records, he announced with satisfaction. Cooperation more efficient than competition. Usually, Sarah agreed, joining them from the expanded medical facility that now treated patients from across the Alliance. Though I still have to referee disputes between researchers who can't agree on proper growing techniques. Some conflicts are healthy, Marcus pointed out. It's the manufactured ones that cause problems. A soft chime from Zeph's communication device announced an incoming message from the Alliance Council, the governing body that had grown organically from the needs of member species rather than being imposed from above. The holographic display showed representatives from 47 species, all of them former enemies who had become partners in building a more peaceful galaxy. The latest Traitor of Chaos Cell has been eliminated, the council chairwoman announced, a crystalline entity whose harmonic voice carried natural authority. Intelligence suggests their influence has been completely neutralized across all known sectors. And the new applications for membership? Admiral Chun hashtag the wounded alien wolf was ready to die. Until a human gave it hope, a story hook that will grip your soul, asterisk, what happens when a most feared predator in the galaxy finds itself broken, bleeding, and abandoned on a hostile world? What occurs when a species known for conquest and violence encounters the one thing it never expected, genuine compassion from the very beings they were taught to despise? In the depths of space, where survival means being the strongest, and mercy is seen as weakness, an injured Kithra warrior named Zeph crashes on a remote human colony world. His people are legendary, 7-foot-tall wolf-like beings with razor-sharp claws, enhanced strength, and a warrior culture that has dominated countless star systems. They are taught from birth that humans are weak, pathetic creatures unworthy of respect. But when Zeph lies dying in the wreckage of his ship, expecting either death or capture, something extraordinary happens. A simple human farmer named Marcus finds him and makes a choice that will change both their species forever. This isn't just a story about first contact. It's about the moment when everything you've been taught proves wrong. It's about discovering that true strength doesn't come from claws or weapons, but from the courage to show kindness to your enemy. It's about how a single act of compassion can spark a revolution that spans the stars. Prepare yourself for a tale that will challenge everything you think you know about strength, honor, and what it truly means to be human. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields. They're won in the quiet moments when someone chooses hope over fear. Welcome to a story where humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or firepower. It's the inexplicable human ability to see light in the darkest places and extend a helping hand to those who least deserve it and most desperately need it.